So much of history is a story of one people conquering another. We haven't seen this very much, particularly in the West, since the fall of the Roman Empire, but we have seen it in China as recently as the 1100s. Now, the phenomenon I'm talking about is the phenomena of civilized meeting uncivilized. The civilized and uncivilized fight each other, and this may surprise you, but usually throughout history, when civilized and uncivilized have fought, the uncivilized have won. Well, exactly what incidents am I talking about? Well, you have the civilized Sumerians way back being conquered by the uncivilized Amorites. You have the case with the Romans. This is more recent. The Romans were conquered by the Germans, or at least, well, maybe not conquered exactly, but the Romans were overrun by the Germans. As recently as the 1100s, you have the Chinese being conquered by Genghis Khan and his Mongolians. Again, compared to the Chinese, I'd have to say that the Mongolians were either uncivilized or semi-civilized. But again, it's a case where the civilized and uncivilized meet, with the uncivilized winning. Now, what happens to civilized people that make them susceptible to being conquered by their enemies? Well, in every case, you'll find that the civilized people do their own weakening from within before they get taken over by the uncivilized people from without. In the case of the Romans, there have been many books written on what went wrong with the Roman Empire. But one thing we can be sure of about the Roman Empire, there was a population decline that was caused by the fact that they simply were not having children as much as their barbaric German neighbors were, and eventually the Germans were able to win. Now, with the case of the Mongolians conquering the Chinese, that's a little bit different. The Chinese outnumbered the Mongolians by a factor of at least 10 to 1. Millions of Chinese people to oppose Genghis Khan and his 100,000 very highly skilled horsemen. What went wrong there? Well, there the uncivilized developed better technology. That is, the Mongolians developed better use of gunpowder, while their more civilized neighbors to the south in China were busy practicing a form of socialism. The result was, when they clashed, the Chinese did not have an adequate army to meet the Mongolian threat. The Chinese army scattered and fled, and the Chinese were conquered and overrun and ruled for a while, ruled for several generations by their Mongolian neighbors. Eventually the Chinese were able to overthrow the Mongolians and kick them out. This story has happened time and time again. Now, there is one exception. When the Europeans met the North and South American Indians, the Europeans won because of the fact that the Europeans had more advanced technology and better weaponry. And also, in this case, the American Indians were not having the children. They were, the average American Indian woman only wanted to have about 1 or 2 babies per woman. And keep in mind, the American Indians in North America at least only lived an average of about 18 years. So the American Indians were having a population decline long before the Europeans came. So in this case, it was the uncivilized people who were doing the population control, or who were weakening themselves from within before the Europeans came from outside and conquered and took over their land. Now, why is this important? It's important because today we have a lot of the same thing. We have people we call civilized in the world, and other people which I would call uncivilized. Will the uncivilized win? They will if the civilized people continue to do things like weaken themselves. And the number one thing that weakens a people, folk, is population control. Another thing that weakens the people militarily is socialism. Socialism makes people think that they can live any old way they want to and not have to take the consequences for the way they live, that we all share in the consequences, with the result that there's a general weakening of the moral fiber of the society, as well as a weakening of the military strength of the society. And the result is the civilized people wind up getting conquered and the uncivilized take over, and mankind has to struggle in the muck and mire that are left by these uncivilized people who take over and almost destroy the civilization that the other people worked so hard to build, only to turn around and work equally hard to destroy.